I'm Nima Rajan. Canada is preparing to lower COVID-19 border barriers.
Thanks to the rising vaccination rates and declining COVID-19 cases, we're able to move forward with adjusted border measures. As long as things stay on the right track, we'll open our borders on September 7th to any traveller who's fully vaccinated with the Canada-approved vaccine at least 14 days before arriving. As a first step, on August 9th, we will be opening non-essential travel to Americans who've been fully vaccinated for at least 14 days. This is in recognition of our unique bond, especially between border communities.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau discussed the federal announcement on Monday in Brampton, Ontario. Well, meanwhile, the planned lifting of border restrictions as of August 9th at 5 Canadian airports is getting positive reactions. The president of Edmonton International Airport, Tom Ruth, says his facility has the testing and safety protocols in place to safely support arriving and departing travelers. International flights had been restricted to Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal in early February when Canada tightened restrictions on travel. Opinion is split on whether proof of vaccination should be mandatory for anyone who wants to travel to Canada. A new poll by Leger and the Association for Canadian Studies found that 58% of respondents were in favor of what is being dubbed a vaccine passport. Still, 30% say such a document is not necessary. As for opening the border with the U.S., Leger's Christian Bork says 44% of survey participants said yes, while 36% said no. Prime Minister Trudeau says the federal government is pouring nearly $120 million into affordable rental units in Brampton, Ontario. The money is set to be used to build a 26-story building that has been described as being multi-residential and energy efficient. More than 300 families are expected to be able to live in these units. The initiative aims to provide low-cost insured loans to developers and cities where more rental housing is needed. And Amy Paul is seeking to show her party has pushed past a period of bitter strife ahead of a likely election.
So in terms of the notice, the first reads as follows. The current motions of non-confidence against Green Party of Canada leader Amy Paul will no longer be considered during the term of the current federal council. No further motions of non-confidence against the leader will be proposed to the current federal council or prior to the next general meeting of the Green Party. The second notice reads, the membership review process with regard to Amy Paul's membership in the Green Party has been suspended.
The Green Party leader says she considered stepping down after what she calls a one-sided campaign waged against her. The National Council of Canadian Muslims has released a lengthy list of policy recommendations for elected officials ahead of a national summit on Islamophobia this week. The group is calling for the creation and funding of a strategy to fight Islamophobia. For provinces, the recommendations include teaching about Islamophobia in schools, an accountability system for police hate crimes units, and the prohibition of white supremacist rallies. Health officials in Newfoundland and Labrador say a third ship is now anchored off the coast of the Avalon Peninsula, about 30 kilometers south of St. John's, with COVID-19 cases among its crew. 4 crew members tested positive for the virus. Meanwhile, 2 other boats remain anchored in Conception Bay, one with 31 crew members who've tested positive and the other with 14 positive cases. Air Canada is adding dozens of routes to the United States as part of its summer schedule, with the change coming after the federal government loosened border restrictions. The airline says the 55 routes to 34 destinations will add up to 220 daily Air Canada flights between the two countries. The additional flights are at airports in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary. A new study suggests that smoke from wildfires could increase the risk of contracting COVID-19. The Desert Research Institute found coronavirus infection rates increased disproportionately during the height of last year's wildfire season. In particular, they noted the number of positive tests skyrocketed during times when there was a larger than normal amount of particulates in the air, such as wildfire smoke. Still, the scientists admit continually changing COVID-19 restrictions may have also played a part. CBC coverage of the Tokyo Olympics will be available live and on demand on Amazon Prime Video. Amazon says the live coverage of the Olympic Games will be offered at no additional cost for its members. The CBC is the Canadian rights holder to the Olympics through 2024 and will have extensive coverage on multiple platforms, starting with the opening ceremony on Friday morning. All right, stay with us as we dig deeper into a report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer that looks into implementing a one-time wealth tax. We'll have an interview with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation Director, Franco Terrazzano, after the break. And of course, more news from around the world coming up shortly. We'll be right back. A report released last week by the Parliamentary Budget Officer claims a one-time tax on Canada's wealthiest residents could generate billions of dollars of revenue. According to the report released Thursday, a 3% tax on those with a net worth of over $10 million and a 5% tax on Canadians who make over $20 million would allow the government to collect over $60 billion over 5 years. However, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says an extreme wealth tax would not cover the budget gap. According to the organization, the Trudeau government's deficit spending would burn through this money in just about a month. Well, joining us now to tell us more about these findings is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
So can you take us back to why this wealth tax was proposed in the first place?
Well, absolutely. You have these politicians in Ottawa who are musing about higher taxes and new taxes because, well, they're tripping over each other trying to figure out how they're going to pay for this massive $1 trillion federal government debt tab. And, for us Canadians, I think we need to be honest with ourselves here. And it's going to be us average taxpayers who are going to get clobbered if these federal politicians don't figure out a way to save some money. So when we hear the Trudeau government announce more massive spending plans, we have to be asking, well, how are they going to pay for all this? Because the government is broke.
Now, the PBO report claims that the government could collect over $60 billion from this one-time tax, but the CTF says that this money would be utilized within a month. So can you tell us a little bit more on this?
Well, first thing, when we hear the government's going to generate $60 billion in revenue, we have to remember that that means $60 billion less in taxpayers' pockets and less in the private sector economy. But really, this is just silly political posturing. And what the government needs to do is focus on reducing the deficit spending. I mean, Trudeau's deficit spending is so big that he would burn through this cash in about a month. So who is going to be left picking up the tab for the other 11 months out of the year? Well, it's going to be average Canadians like me and you if these politicians don't save some money.
So the CTF is saying that this $60 billion would not cover the budget gap. So what is this budget gap and how much money do officials need to address it, sir?
Yeah, just to underscore just how big this deficit spending is going to be, even if the government puts in this wealth tax, I mean, over the next 5 years, the budget gap would still be $270 billion, right? So look, these politicians, they owe us the truth on how they're going to pay for all this big time spending. And the truth is that, it's going to be average Canadians who get hit hard with higher taxes if politicians don't actually tighten their own belts.
And you also mentioned in a recent release that the wealth tax would actually hamper our economic recovery. So can you explain this as well, sir?
Yeah, wealth taxes, they're very bad policy, right? They're very complex, they're very costly, and they can lead to some very dire economic consequences. And really, that's the reason that you have a bunch of countries that have tried a wealth tax and then abandoned the wealth tax. And the best example there is from France, right? They had a wealth tax in. Well, their wealth tax and higher taxes chased away thousands of French residents and billions of dollars in assets. And right now, we need to be focusing on economic recovery. The last thing that we should be hearing from our politicians is them musing about taking billions of dollars out of our economy.
So what are some realistic steps that officials can take to save money and fill this budget gap?
Well, there's still a lot of fat on the federal budget, and I'll give you 3 ways they should rein in spending. The first is we have to see leadership at the top. That means MPs taking a pay cut. I mean, our members of parliament, they've pocketed 2 pay raises during COVID-19, which is a slap in the face to us taxpayers. We also need to see bureaucrats willing to be sharing in the tough times. During COVID-19, we've seen thousands of job losses in the private sector, but we've actually seen thousands of job increases among government bureaucrats. And the third thing that we need to see, we need to see a taxpayer-friendly recovery. We don't need politicians and bureaucrats running around with our tax dollars trying to be investment bankers and picking winners and losers. We say lower taxes, don't use our tax dollars for corporate welfare.
All right, sir, just about 45 seconds left. But if this debt cannot be met through these spending cuts, how will officials likely move forward to address it?
Well, we need them to cut spending, because if they don't cut spending, it's going to be average Canadians who get clobbered. And that's why when we hear new spending announcements, we have to be asking ourselves, we have to be asking politicians, how are you going to pay for it, right? If you add in provincial and federal government debt, the average Canadian owes $57,000 in government debt. And, that's just going to be a hard hit to taxpayers if politicians don't save some money.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily today.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Stay tuned. We've got more top national headlines coming up after the break as BC residents are fleeing wildfires, and they're facing even more obstacles while they do so. Meanwhile, COVID-19 cases continue to grow in Yukon, and Ontario science advisors recommend easing some school restrictions. These stories and more coming up next. Residents from wildfire-evacuated communities in BC's interior are facing mounting challenges. Officials with the Thompson-Nicola Regional District say they are running out of nearby hotel space for people being chased from their homes by the flames. District Chair Ken Gillis says the region is also looking for security and policing personnel to help secure evacuated areas. BC is currently battling 300 wildfires, which continue to force more and more evacuations. A medical health officer with Interior Health says it has received several complaints about letters sent out to unvaccinated residents urging them to get their COVID-19 shots. Dr. Silvina Nima says a team is reviewing concerns that the letters reveal private health information by including a recipient's vaccination status on the envelope. But she says Interior Health is seeing many people coming in with their letter and getting vaccinated. COVID-19 continues to worm its way through Yukon as health officials there report 20 new cases over the weekend. 14 of the cases were confirmed in Whitehorse, while 4 were tallied in rural communities. The remaining 2 have yet to be pinned down. The new infections bring the territory's active case count to 76. There have been 522 COVID-19 cases in Yukon since the pandemic began, and 453 since June 1st. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is calling a partnership between a BC First Nation and a Calgary-based group of companies on a new liquefied natural gas project fantastic news. Mr. Kenney says in a tweet that the proposed Slissoms LNG project in northern BC will create a huge economic opportunity for First Nations, as well as thousands of jobs. The Nisga'a First Nation, Rockies LNG, and Texas-based Western LNG have filed notice of a partnership to export liquefied natural gas to Asia. A senior climatologist with Environment Canada says Western Canada really needs several days of rain to cool the wildfires burning in the region. But Environment Canada's David Phillips says he doesn't see any major weather system staying put in parts of the prairies or British Columbia to help extinguish some of the flames. He also says the heavy smoke settling on Alberta is resulting in lower than expected temperatures as the sun can't penetrate it. The Manitoba government has promised to consider ideas put forward by Treaty 5 chiefs in an action plan that was released yesterday concerning efforts to tackle racism and discrimination. Parts of the plan will see regular reports sent to the United Nations on the issue and new awareness campaigns. The government did not comment on demands by Grand Chiefs of the MKO and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, calling on the Progressive Conservatives to either overhaul their approach to First Nations issues or resign. Ontario's Science Advisory Table says the physical, emotional, and developmental health of children has been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and restrictions placed on schools. Their recommendations for the coming school year paint a very different picture from the last. The experts are calling for the return of extracurriculars and loosening masking, distancing, and cohorting rules when risk is low. They also say closing schools should only happen in catastrophic scenarios. Sometimes known as the Big Smoke, Toronto, as well as southern Ontario and some regions of southern Quebec, are under a special air quality advisory. Environment Canada issued the advisory late Monday afternoon as smoke from wildfires burning in Ontario's northwest began to blow into southern parts of the two provinces. The agency says while the smoke is causing poor air quality and is reducing visibility, conditions are expected to improve today with the passage of a cold front. 4 days of commemorations have been planned in honor of Indigenous children who disappeared after being admitted to Quebec hospitals. Members of the Adikamekw Nation started yesterday with a ceremony on their traditional territory about 250 kilometers north of Montreal. Members of the provincial legislature, including Indigenous Affairs Minister Ian Lafreniere, are scheduled to attend an event today. A decision to deny parole for convicted murderer Alan Ledger has been upheld. The Parole Board of Canada denied his application in January, but he appealed the decision. The appeal division of the board said that after review, they found no issue with the original decision. Mr. Ledger was known as the Monster of Miramichi for committing a series of murders in northeastern New Brunswick in the late 1980s. A nonprofit group is going to continue the operations of a food program at PEI schools. The program, originally titled PEI Healthy School Food Program, was launched last year to provide island students with healthy, affordable, and locally sourced lunch options. The program, funded by the Department of Social Development and Housing, will continue to use a pay-what-you-can model to a maximum of $5 per meal in partnership with local food vendors to provide lunches. All right, we take a look at what's making news around the world up next in our international segment as the Chinese government is blamed for a massive Microsoft Exchange hack. Meanwhile, the British government decides against vaccinating children, and Germany and Belgium continue to see deadly flooding. We'll have these stories and more international news coming up after the break. Stay with us. We'll be back after some short messages. In the battle against hacking, the Biden administration has now set its sights on China. The U.S. and its Western allies have formally blamed the Beijing government for a massive hack on Microsoft Exchange email server software. They also say criminal hackers associated with the Chinese government have carried out ransomware and other illicit cyber operations. All this comes on the heels of complaints against Russia, which is blamed for backing or egging on those involved in ransomware attacks that have targeted critical U.S. infrastructure. The British government has decided not to inoculate most children under 18 against COVID-19 until more data on the vaccines becomes available. The government says youth with certain disabilities or who are immune suppressed will be eligible for vaccination. Britain's National Vaccine Panel says the health benefits of universal vaccination don't outweigh the risks for most young people who typically suffer only mild symptoms of COVID-19. Figures compiled by Britain's Press Association show at least 430 migrants made the perilous journey across the English Channel to the UK on Monday in a new record for a single day. PA said on Tuesday that the figure surpasses the previous high of 416, which was set in September 2020. It comes despite a vow from Britain's Home Secretary to make the Channel crossings, mainly from France, unviable. Afghanistan's government says several rockets hit near the presidential palace shortly before President Ashraf Ghani was to give an address to mark the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha. There were no injuries, and the rockets landed outside the heavily fortified palace grounds. No one immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. This came as the U.S. and NATO complete their final withdrawal from Afghanistan. Many Afghans are worried whether their war-ravaged country will fall deeper into chaos and violence. Turkey's president says his country will talk with the Taliban regarding his country's bid to operate and secure the airport in the Afghan capital of Kabul. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan acknowledged that the Islamist group had some discomforts over Turkey's proposed plans for the Hamid Karzai International Airport, but insisted the conversation with Turkey would be more comfortable than previous negotiations with the U.S. Mr. Erdogan's comments follow Taliban warnings last week that Turkey should withdraw its troops from Afghanistan. A teacher in one of the poorest communities in the Andes, who has never held office, is now Peru's president-elect after officials in the South American country declared him the winner of a runoff election held last month. Mr. Castillo was officially declared winner Monday after Peru's longest in 4 decades. He received 44,000 more votes than right-wing politician Keiko Fujimori. Mr. Castillo popularized the phrase, "no more poor in a rich country." Haitians are beginning a series of official ceremonies to honor President Jovenel Moïse nearly 2 weeks after he was assassinated at home. Officials say the body of Mr. Moïse is to lie in state starting before dawn Tuesday at the National Pantheon Museum in the capital of Port-au-Prince. He was shot multiple times during a July 7th attack at his private home in which his wife was seriously wounded. A corruption trial of former South African President Jacob Zuma, who is currently in prison, has been postponed to August 10th, while it is decided whether he must be physically present in the courtroom or can appear via video from where he is in detention. Mr. Zuma claimed that proceedings held via a video link prevent him from properly consulting with his lawyers. Mr. Zuma is currently in Escort Correctional Center, about 100 kilometers away. He is accused of receiving bribes from French arms manufacturer Telus during South Africa's purchase of arms in 1999. Jeff Bezos has completed a short voyage into space on his rocket company's first flight with passengers. The Amazon founder blasted off with a hand-picked group, and their Blue Origin capsule landed 10 minutes later in the desert floor in West Texas. The passengers included Mr. Bezos' younger brother, as well as an 18-year-old from the Netherlands and an 82-year-old aviation pioneer from the Dallas area. Mr. Bezos is the second billionaire in just over a week to ride his own rocket into space, following Virgin Galactic's Richard Branson, who beat him to space by 9 days. Olympian Kanisha Burks looks forward to competing in the Tokyo Olympics next week, but is humbled by the long hours she spent at McDonald's to get there. The 26-year-old American spent her childhood working hard at the fast food chain to support her family and save for college. Realizing her immense talent in track, Miss Burks applied for several scholarships and ended up racing for the University of Alabama before making the USA Olympic team. At each step along the way, Miss Burks credits patience and consistent goal setting as being main contributors to success. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website and follow us on social media. We'll see you next time. Take care, Canada.